And welcome everyone here in the auditorium tonight. Thank you for coming, and welcome to everybody at home as well. And so, as Bob said, I've been lucky enough to spend some time in Australia, 5 times, and a 6th coming up next month. And I've taken literally thousands of photographs. So it's really fun to be able to share some of those with you tonight, and a little bit of the knowledge that I've picked up along the way about some really common plants in Australia, the plants that you would see yourselves if you went to visit there. Okay, so I thought I'd start at the very basic and identify where Australia is in the world. So as you can see from this map, Australia is down here in the southern hemisphere, just south of the equator, which is about right here. Indonesia is just north of Australia, and Antarctica is down below, south of Australia. So New Zealand is over here to the east. So to get to Australia from Canada, obviously we're in Canada on the east coast over here. What we have to do is we have to fly to Vancouver, and then from Vancouver we make our way to the east coast of Australia. Brisbane is right here on the east coast, and that's where we'll be kind of focused for our talks, about 400 kilometers north and south and west of Brisbane. This is a map of general vegetation regions of Australia, and Australia has been drying out for about 50 million years, and that's really reflected by the yellow section in the middle of the screen of the northern desert and the southern desert. There are, however, tropical regions in green to the north of the country, some beautiful tropical rainforest up there, and also the wet tropics, tropical rainforest on the east of the country, the northeast. And then as we come down the east coast, we're into tropical. As we move south, it becomes cooler. We're into more of a temperate climate and temperate vegetation. And at the bottom, of course, there's Tasmania with our cool temperate rainforest in the south. So again, we're going to be focused right here, this part of Australia. So I thought I would just kind of zoom out and give you a bit of a bird's eye view of the habitats in that area. No shortage of coastline in Queensland and New South Wales. This is an example of what the coast looks like. You can see that there's vegetation right on the beachfront, so that vegetation would have to be well adapted to salt spray and to lots of wind. So we've got some species that exist in this habitat. A little bit further back, we have what's called a Wallam Heath habitat. And even though it's still on, the plants are still growing on sand, they're well adapted to do that. And well adapted to heat, well adapted to low amounts of rainfall as well. And we'll be talking about those adaptations. And we've got some grass trees here. We'll be talking about them next week. We've got a beautiful scribbly gum eucalyptus right here, and we'll also be talking about that next week. And over here in the left-hand side, we have Banksia, and we'll be talking about that today. So if we move further inland, we reach some beautiful eucalypt forests. It's a little bit cooler, the elevation a little bit higher, a little more rain, the soil's a little bit more fertile, and we'll see some species from that habitat as well. Moving even further in elevation, further away from the coast. So we've gone up in elevation. We've reached a mountain range called the Great Dividing Range, and it has much more rainfall and high enough temperatures to be able to support fragments of both subtropical and temperate rainforest. And the first 3 plant families that we're going to talk about tonight, we have species from those families that evolved and still grow in the rainforests of the Great Dividing Range. So an endemic species is a native species that grows in a specific region and doesn't grow naturally anywhere else in the world. So an easy way to think about it in terms of Australia is to think about the fauna. So think about a koala. That's obviously native to Australia, and it obviously doesn't exist anywhere else in the wild. So plant species are the same. The very high percentage of plant species in Australia, approximately 85%, are native to Australia, but also don't grow anywhere else but Australia. And the reason for that is Australia has been an island continent for 45 million years. It was attached to other landforms before that, but around 45 million years ago, it separated. So both the flora and the fauna of Australia have been able to evolve independently of any other influences, independently of any interference, any competition, and from other species elsewhere in the world. And as a result, they have evolved into some very unique shapes, forms, and have very unique adaptations to their environment. So we're going to talk about that. So our first plant family is the Araucariaceae family. And it is an absolutely amazing family to consider because it evolved 200 million years ago in the Australian rainforest, and it still exists in the Australian rainforest today. Okay. So think about it, 200 million years ago. That's with the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Age. The world was covered with rainforest. There were giant tree ferns, giant club mosses, giant horsetails. I think there were also cycads, and there were members of this plant family way back then. Fossil records indicate that the form of the species that we're going to look at tonight has changed very little in 200 million years. So when we look at these plants, we're really looking at living fossils. And how cool is that? So the first one we're going to see is the bunya pine, Araucaria bidwillii. We can see it here. It's emerging up over the canopy of the rainforest. Very tall species. It can reach 45 meters high. When it's young, it has kind of a conical shape. And we can see that here. When it gets older, this species has more of a dome shape. And I don't know about you, but to me, this tree looks really primeval. It has the dome shape, which is characteristic. It has no leaves on its branches until the very tips of the branches right here. And if you look at the leaves on the right-hand side of the screen, the leaves are actually scales. They are hard and rigid in texture. They have pointy ends. They're shaped like a triangle, and they're arranged in a spiral around the branch. So they are unlike anything I had ever seen previous. And you can really imagine that these hard, pointy leaves were protective against the herbivorous dinosaurs 200 million years ago when the plant was evolving. So it's an absolutely massive tree. As I said, it can grow to about 45 meters tall. It can be 4 meters in diameter. It can live to 800 years. And it is one of the earliest gymnosperms or conifers to have evolved on Earth. So being a gymnosperm, it produces its seeds in cones. And we see a cone here on the right-hand side of the screen, and this with some seeds attached to it. The seeds are edible and were an important food source for the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. And I should mention that even though we're calling it a bunya pine, it's not really a true pine. It's not in the Pinaceae family whatsoever. The settlers, when they arrived in the late 1700s, and they gave common names to a lot of these species, if the plant had a cone, they called it a pine, whether or not it was a pine. So that's just what they did. So this, however, is not a pine. True pines don't grow in Australia, and the Araucariaceae family doesn't exist in the Northern Hemisphere. So pine is definitely a misnomer, but that is the common name. So the bunya is highly significant to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. The seeds or nuts were a really important food source for them, and the tree itself was sacred. The families were assigned a bunya tree to themselves, quote unquote, and it's a tree that they revered and a tree that they harvested nuts from over the years. They harvested them from the ground where the nuts fell, the cones fell, but they also, it is believed, used these notches. They put notches in the trunk of the bunya and used them as footholds with which to climb the bunya to the top, the canopy, where the mature cones were. Post-colonization, well, the Araucarias, the rainforest kind of met the same fate that old growth forest just about everywhere has met after colonization. It's been a very important timber tree, the Araucaria, and there are even plantations of Araucarias that are grown and maintained in Australia today. And of the hoop pine. The hoop pine is a species, Araucaria cunninghamii, and it's grown in Australian plantations for timber. So let's talk about a different species. This is the Norfolk Island pine, and you may actually recognize this tree because if you've been in Kent lately, these trees are for sale in Kent in pots, at Kent in pots. They sell them at Christmas time and people use them as Christmas trees without understanding their evolutionary history, but now you do, so you can look at them with new eyes. This evolved as well 180, 200 million years ago, the Norfolk pine. It evolved on a small island, Norfolk Island, just off the coast of mainland Australia. So it's very nicely adapted to wind and to salt spray. So it's planted as a specimen and as a street tree in Eastern Australia. And what's really cool is that you see them when you walk around. This tree is different than the bunya. You can see that the needles of this tree, the leaves, resemble the needles of our conifers more. They're not in the form of scales. And I actually have a Norfolk Island pine in a pot on the table up front, and you're welcome to come up later and touch it because the needles are really soft. There's also an example of an Araucaria species that has scales up at the front. So you're welcome later to come up and touch that one and to compare the scales form of the leaves with the needle form of the leaves that the Norfolk Island pine has. This one is another member of the Araucaria family, and the story behind this one is pretty special. This is called the Wallamai pine, and you may have heard of it because in 1994, it was rediscovered in New South Wales, just in the Blue Mountains to the northwest of Sydney. It was thought to be extinct. It was found by a couple of forest rangers that were out doing surveys, and it was eventually identified as part of the Araucaria family. It's been given its genus of its own, Wallimia, and the nobilis is named after the guy who rediscovered it, David Noble. There are books written about this situation, the Wallamai pine, so you can refer to those if you're interested. It rocked the botanical world, and it was really the botanical equivalent of discovering a live dinosaur. That cool, that special. And it's very uncertain in the wild at the moment. Fewer than 60 adult trees are presently alive. Their location has been kept super secret. No one is allowed to go and visit except for researchers, obviously. But the tree has been propagated and quite successfully, and it has been sent to botanical gardens all around the world. I think you can even buy it online. keep it in your living room in a pot, and have that connection to 200 million years ago. And in my opinion, it doesn't get any better than that. So yeah, so as I was saying, some of them are planted as street trees, some are planted as specimen trees, and some of them are just growing. Here we see some Araucarias in the back dunes of a beach, not far from where we stay when we go. And I can't tell you how absolutely exciting it is to be walking down the beach or walking down the street and seeing this species growing there, in front of me. So just an amazing connection to the ancient past. So here's another amazing connection to the ancient past. This is called, the species we're going to be talking about now is called Antarctic beech, Nothofagus morii. And we're back up in the Great Dividing Range here. You can see, nice view across. But instead of being in our subtropical rainforest, as we were with our Araucarias, we're in a temperate rainforest with the Nothofagus. The Nothofagus evolved 80 million years ago, and it's still growing in temperate rainforests in Australia today. So here's a stand in a temperate rainforest. The temperate rainforest is a little bit different. We see the hanging moss, we see the ferns on the ground as ground cover. There's not much in the way of shrubs, but the moss gives it an amazing, again, primeval look, actually, here. The gnarled or the kind of the twisty shapes of the Antarctic beech trunk and branches are characteristic of that species as well. So the Nothofagus is a flowering plant. It evolved 80 million years ago, and it was one of the first flowering plants that evolved and still exists. So as you can see, its bark and its leaves resemble our flowering trees in our part of the world. However, the leaves of the Nothofagus are glossy, tough, and rigid in texture, and they have a drip tip at the end, which is a pointy tip, and it helps the rain, which happens quite frequently in the rainforest, run off pretty quickly and helps prevent the growth of mold on the leaf as the water runs off. And up here behind the little boxes, I've written Nothofagus equals false beech because you might not be surprised to hear that it's not related to our beeches and our oaks, this tree. Notho means false, so it's a false beech. And in terms of where it grows elsewhere in the southern hemisphere, but as far as I know, it doesn't grow in the northern hemisphere either. So here's a picture of an ancient Nothofagus that is pretty special. It was a thrill of a lifetime to be able to see this tree in the wild. So what we're looking at is we've got at least 4 large trunks that are growing above a tangled mass below, which are actually roots from which the soil, it's a root part of the root system from which the soil has eroded, so it's become visible. But the trunks up above are estimated to be between 2,000 and 3,000 years old each. They are clonally, they're clones. They're clones of each other. So they're genetically identical. And what they are suckers that have been thrown up by the root system. So it's actually one tree that we're looking at with at least 4 suckers that are ancient. The suckers have come up from the root system, as I said, and the root system is estimated to be approximately 12,000 years old. So we've even got one younger trunk, one younger sucker that's coming up here from the root system that's down below underground. So this is amazing. It's an example of what's called vegetative regeneration. It's a natural reproductive strategy used by the Nothofagus, and it's used in addition to sexual reproduction, the use of the flower, the seed, etc., germination. It's used in addition to that strategy when sexual reproduction is not, the conditions for that are not favorable. The Nothofagus has this strategy of sending up clonal shoots and suckers to guarantee its survival and its persistence in the landscape over time. And given that the Nothofagus has been on Earth for 80 million years, it's a pretty effective strategy for the Nothofagus to use. The other cool thing about the Nothofagus is that there's an orchid, a beach orchid, Dendromium falcon, that actually grows as an epiphyte on the bark of the Nothofagus. And here it is on the left-hand side. You can barely see it. And here it is in the center. It was a better view of the leaves of the orchid. And an epiphyte is an air plant that attaches itself to a tree in an attempt to achieve height, and with height comes more sunlight. It's not parasitic. It doesn't affect the tree. However, if there are too many epiphytes and they're too heavy, it may cause a rainforest tree to topple over. In that sense, that's not great for the tree. But in general, the epiphytes simply hitch a ride on the tree, and that's what this one is doing. So grows only on the Antarctic beach. And as we know, orchids require a mycorrhizal association with fungus to be able to germinate and to survive. And so that fungus must also exist on the bark of the Antarctic beach, which is also pretty cool. This is an orange fungus, Cyteria septentrionalis, that Aboriginal peoples ate. They would gather it when it was mature, and it has kind of a sweet jelly-like taste, and they would harvest that and eat it as a food source. We're not leaving the rainforest quite yet. This is our third plant family. This is the macadamia nut tree. And I took a picture of this little sapling in the rainforest one year, and just love it. It's a member of the Proteaceae family that evolved in the rainforest, again, tens of millions of years ago, and still grows in the forest of Southeast Queensland. So you may associate the macadamias more with Hawaii and think that they're actually native to Hawaii, but they're not. They're native to Southeast Queensland, the rainforest there. And they were just exported to Hawaii as a commercial nut to be grown in plantations for sale. We have some macadamia nuts up at the front, so you can check those out later, taste them, but it's quite a popular nut. You've probably tasted it before. I have a picture of the flower of the macadamia and the nut of the macadamia here as well. The nut is kind of cool because it is the hardest nut that is grown and sold commercially. Really difficult to extract the hardest shell, sorry, the hardest shell. It's difficult to extract the nut. Specialized equipment is needed to break into the shell. The green that we see here is the husk. Under that is the brown hard shell, and under that is the macadamia nut. So that's one of the reasons why the macadamia is so expensive. It's because they need that specialized machinery, and also because it takes about 7 to 10 years for the macadamia tree to actually start producing the fruit, the nuts, and they also have to be harvested by hand as well. So all that factors into the price of the macadamia nut. So it's one of the most expensive nuts that you can buy. All right, so we're going to leave the rainforest and we're going to descend in altitude, because as hard as it is to leave the rainforest, we have to face the reality And the reality is that Australia has been drying out for the past 50 million years. And the rainforest has contracted into areas of higher elevation and more rainfall. And the rainforest trees have been evolving into species that are better adapted to the arid conditions, the heat, the sunlight, and the presence of fire that runs through the landscape quite frequently, not to mention the poor soils also that exist. So we're going to talk about, from now on, we're going to talk about species that have adapted and have to survive and even thrive in that kind of landscape. So we're going to start with the Banksia, which I think is my all-time favorite flower in Australia. There's a picture of Banksia amula, Wallam Banksia, just to the left, with the beautiful flower head. So my partner Mark would testify that I have probably taken a picture of every Banksia I have seen in Queensland to this point, and he could be right. Unlike our other species that are confined to the rainforest, this is a distribution map, and we see that Banksia has been able to spread into every territory and state in Australia, except for that central area that we don't see any Banksia here. It doesn't grow in the central desert regions. It also does not grow in the rainforest. All but one of the species of Banksia is endemic, meaning it grows only in Australia. So there's kind of a story behind the one species that grows elsewhere. It grows in Papua New Guinea. Back in evolutionary time, about 15 million years ago, there was a land bridge between this is the York Peninsula of Australia here, between northern tip of Australia and Papua New Guinea, which is up a little bit further north. So Banksia was able to cross that land bridge into PNG, and it grows and evolves as a separate species and still grows there as well today. So let's talk a little bit about Banksia habitats. Where has Banksia evolved? Well, Banksia has evolved to grow in quite a few habitats, dry habitats. Here we see Banksia trees, small trees on the beachfront. They obviously have adapted to lots of salt spray. They've adapted to sandy soil and very windy conditions there. And that's Banksia integrifolia, or coastal Banksia. We see our dry heath habitat. Again, in the back dunes, we see that Banksia amula, or Wallam Banksia, grows there and is very successful. And that, trying to make my pointer work, but the Wallam Banksia, you can see the seed head in the bottom left of the picture on the screen. And it's adapted to the sandy soil. It has adapted to the heat. It's adapted to the dry conditions very successfully, and we'll talk about how it's adapted to those conditions. We also have Banksia in dry eucalypt forest. Two species, dwarf Banksia and candlestick Banksia, grow here. They grow as shrubs in this forest, and I'm kind of pointing to them with the pointer there. And fire, it looks like a habitat that would experience fire quite often. And sure enough, Banksia has evolved to survive the fires that occur in these dry areas. So I thought, before we talk about how it's dry adapted, that we just take a look at that gorgeous flower head of Banksia. And this is swamp Banksia, Banksia robur. And it has, what we're looking at here are flower buds. Each flower head is composed of hundreds, if not thousands, of individual flowers. There's one species, Banksia grandis, in Western Australia, that they've estimated contains about 6,000 species, or no, not species, 6,000 flowers. Other species have hundreds of flowers. So the flower buds that we see on the flower head are of a green color, And the rest of the flower part is pink, and it makes for an absolutely beautiful display. The green and the pink of the swamp banksia. And swamp banksia grows in areas that are a little bit wetter. They're also on sand, but sand that's not drained as well. And even in acidic soils or acidic sand, the swamp banksia can grow in those conditions. So that's the immature flower head. When the flower matures and blossoms, it looks like this. It turns yellow. That's its color. And to explain a little bit about the flower parts, there are no petals on banksia that are differentiated. Instead, what we're seeing that looks really spiky is the style, the female style part, reproductive part of the flower. On the end of the style, the spiky part, is the stigma, which receives the pollen during pollination. So each one of these spiky parts, again, represents a flower, an individual flower on the flower head. The stamens are kind of recurved, and they're all jumbled up here in the center, close to the axis of the cone. So as you can imagine, with hundreds and thousands of flowers on each flower head, they produce enormous quantities of nectar. And sure enough, animal pollinators feast on banksia flower heads. On the left, we have a Barnaby cockatoo, and it is feasting. We also see honeyeaters and other parrots that feed on banksia flowers when they're ripe, mature. And on the right, we see a little tiny marsupial called the honey possum, and it's feasting on the flower head as well, as do other marsupials and bats even. Our bats are quite a bit larger than this tiny little marsupial, and it also enjoys the banksia flower nectar. Insects will also swarm as well, and all these animals, of course, are assisting in the fertilization of the flower and the formation of seed. So this is what happens. On the left, you see a picture of the banksia flower parts that are dying. And on the right, those flower parts have mostly fallen off, the seed pod, we'll call it. And it reveals the woody axis of the seed pod, but also the woody fruit that have formed. So these, they're called follicles, are actually fruit that have seeds inside. And when the seeds are mature, it can take a year and a half, and the conditions are right, those follicles will open and the seeds will be released and they'll fall to the ground. And you can see here on this banksia seed pod, and this is swamp banksia again, you can see that some of the follicles are open, but some of the follicles are still closed. The next slide shows the variability in the amount, the number of follicles on a seed pod, on the size of the follicles on the seed pod. To the left is that coastal banksia, and the follicles are quite a bit smaller than what we see on the right, which is your banksia amula or Wallum banksia. Huge follicles here. A couple of them have opened and released the seeds already, and a couple of them are still closed. And on the Wallum banksia, something else that's a little different is that it retains the dried parts. So it kind of has like a shaggy appearance to it. So as you can imagine, having a woody seed pod and woody fruit follicles to protect the seeds protects the seeds. It protects the seeds from herbivores that might come to eat the seeds, and it also protects the seeds against fire. So if we look at how banksia has adapted to both heat and fire, we see that the woody seed pod and the woody follicles are protective. And as you can see here in the picture on the left, these follicles have opened in response to fire, because some banksia species do that. Their follicles can only open, the seeds can only be released when a fire goes through. There's a resin that holds the follicles together, and that resin melts, and the seeds are released that way. So Banksia, over 50 million years, has adapted along with fire. The leaves of the Banksia that we saw earlier are really, they have a kind of a stiff texture. They really have a thick cuticle, and both of those, the thick cuticle means it has a stiff texture, and that protects against water loss. Another way that Banksia has adapted to fire and to heat, the bark is thick and protective against fire. And we also see that half of Banksia species have what's called lignotubers and epicormic buds. So I will explain that. The lignotuber is actually a swelling at the top of the root crown that contains dormant buds. And when fire passes through, those buds will sprout and the plant will regenerate. So the plant does not die in a fire after all. There's also starch in the lignotuber, which supports the growth of the shoots until they're able to produce leaves, which will photosynthesize and then produce the food for the plant. So in the right-hand picture, we see that this is a Banksia grandis from Western Australia, and we see that it has a couple of years after a fire, these are the leaves that are being produced, and the plant is on its way to recovering. So that's a lignotuber. There's also something that Banksia has called epicormic buds, and these are dormant buds, but they're underneath the bark. And the picture on the left shows that quite well with the leaves growing from the bark. And on the right, we see a Banksia several years after a fire that looks kind of crazy with shoots and with leaves that have appeared and sprouted after fire. So that plant is also surviving. The other adaptation that Banksia has is to dry nutrient-poor soils. It has evolved a root called a proteoid or a cluster root. It's like a dense mat. You can see little rootlets, and they increase the surface area for water and nutrient absorption for the Banksia plant. Because, as indicated here, Banksia does not form mycorrhizal relationships with fungi. So they really do rely on those proteoid or cluster roots to help them survive in challenging conditions, poor soils, gravelly soils, sandy soils. Before we leave the Banksia, I just wanted to show you some pictures of species from Western Australia. The flowers, absolutely gorgeous, as you can see, again, kind of organized on that vertical axis. This on the left is called acorn Banksia. You can see how it has a pattern of the flower blossoms opening from the bottom, and it kind of creates a little cap here on the bottom, and I think that's where the common name of acorn Banksia came from. I actually have a dried version of this plant up at the front, so you can, of this flower up at the front, so you can take a look at the flower afterwards if you like. On the right-hand side, we have the gorgeous scarlet Banksia from Western Australia. We have Banksia flowers that are also kind of oriented cone shape, and not just on a vertical axis, but they also have a cone shape. This is a flower that has not matured, so we see the immature flower buds, if you will, and in a cone shape, and this Banksia has sepals that surround the immature flower buds. So Banksia in Aboriginal culture, the Aboriginal peoples exploited the Banksia flower head as a sweet source of food as well. They sucked on the actual flower, or they soaked it in water to create a sweet drink. There were actually cultural taboos against harvesting or the flower head until the animals began to feed on it. So that was the signal for the the humans to understand that the nectar was ripe and fit for consumption at that time. The Aboriginal people also used the mature flower head as torches and the dried flower heads, some of them as hairbrushes. And Bulgala is one of many Aboriginal names for Banksia. So settler culture, Banksia being a symbol of the Australian bush, hardy, resilient, adaptable. Banksia, a cool story is that Banksia is named after Joseph Banks. He was the botanist on Captain Cook's voyage to Eastern Australia on the ship the Endeavour. They landed in Botany Bay, just south of what's now the city of Sydney in 1770. And Joseph Banks, when he disembarked from the ship, one of the first plants he saw was the Banksia. He fell in love with it and he got it named after him. And the illustration is a period illustration of saw Banksia, Banksia serrata, by a gentleman named Sidney Parkinson. He drew this in 1770, and he was the official illustrator of the specimens that Joseph Banks collected and brought back to England, the botanical specimens. So that is kind of neat too. So I just wanted to show some fun shots of Banksia in the Australian culture. You can walk down a street in the local town and see street art of Banksia seed pods. You can see street signs of Banksia, fine art of Banksia, and tattoo art of Banksia on the right. Banksia also affected or influenced the literary world. May Gibbs was an Australian author and illustrator. And you have to admit that this is Wallam Banksia here on the left. You have to admit that the seed pod looks somewhat humanoid with all that shagginess and the follicles, which could stand in for eyes and nose and mouth. And she gave nightmares to generations of Australian children because she created the big bad Banksia men. And here's a picture of the big bad Banksia men. So she wrote books and illustrated stories for kids. And the one on the left is a picture of the Banksia men sitting on the branches of the Banksia tree, hatching a plot. And the picture on the right is a picture of a Banksia man who's abducting a little child character and running away with her. And that's from May Gibbs's book, Snuggle Pot and Cuddle Pie. And we'll also see her next week because she invented characters based upon the eucalyptus seed capsules. And she called them gum nut babies. So we'll see those pictures next week. The Banksia wood itself is not particularly suitable for use as timber, but the Banksia seed pod is. It is made of wood. This is a picture of Banksia grandis. I'm holding it so you get a sense of how large the seed pod is. We see the follicles are all open. If we cut that cone into a cross section, here's the cross section of the cone. And this area here are the follicles that have been cut. So here and here, the open follicles. And these cross sections are sold just like that as coasters that people buy. And obviously tourists go crazy over that product, especially tourists that are into Banksia and botany. And here on the left is the result of the wood turning process of the seed pod. And it is a candle holder. And what's fun is you can see the actual light of the candles through the follicles. Another product that the artists make is a little tiny round atomizer. You put your essential oils in and they are passively diffused into the air. And I have both an atomizer and a candle holder made of the Banksia seed pod here in the front, and you can take a look at that afterwards as well if you're here in the auditorium. This again is that beautiful acorn banksia that we saw earlier, and it's been dried. And I have one of these, I think I mentioned. You can take a look at that as well. And banksia flowers dried are very popular in the floral industry, and they're shipped all over the world. And it's a big industry as well because they're beautiful and people love them. So that's about it. Thank you. Thank you for listening. So next Monday, if you're interested in coming back, we're going to be talking about eucalypts, acacias, grass trees, and if we have time, we'll talk about casuarina or she oaks, more iconic plants of Australia that have adapted to the dry conditions that exist in that country. So thank you very much.
So, are there any questions?
Somebody's raising.
About the Norway pine, I'm interested to know that it comes from Australia. I've had Norway pine as a house plant for years.
Norfolk, I mean.
I'm on my second one. My stage began as a small plant on the table and so, wow, maybe my present one's 6 feet high, I don't know.
Right.
And, you know, it's my Christmas tree every year, my Charlie Brown tree. And
Cool. And so take a look and make sure that the one you have matches the one on the table, because that one is the Norfolk Island pine. And that's what you have too. Yeah. And Norfolk Island is a little island off the east coast of Australia. It's an Australian territory, and that's where these trees are native to. And you mentioned that you've been using it as a Christmas tree all along. So yeah, that's really cool, right? So now you can look at it. That's right. Yeah. And now you know that it existed on Earth 200 million years ago. So how cool is that, right? And we've got our Christmas decorations on them. So any other questions from anybody? Nothing?
You're saying that the macadamia nut's in the Protea family, but the flower of it looks very different than the.
Yeah, it's like an elongated cluster, isn't it? Yeah, hanging down.
Close up look at it to see the similarity.
Actually, I haven't. That wasn't one of my pictures. That was so I haven't seen the flower in real life. It doesn't have that woody axis that its relative, the Banksia, has. It has a kind of a drooping aspect to it, but it does have the pointy styles. I don't know if you've noticed, it kind of looks a bit spiky, and that's from the styles. So that's shared with the Banksia flower. Yeah, it's kind of cool, huh?
The question from Peter Steiner: what's the common holiday tree in Australian living rooms? They import firs like we import Norfolk pines.
Oh, that's a good question. Gee whiz, that is a very good question. I haven't been there at Christmas time, but this year I will be there at Christmas time. Mark, do you have an opinion on that? Do they use regular Christmas trees in Australia?
I remember seeing an old John Wayne movie where he was in Hawaii. And they traveled up into the hills and cut down a Norfolk Island pine.
Did they? Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was in a movie. That's it.
Okay, well, yeah, it was in a movie and it was Hawaii, so I'm going to find that out. I know that they do import our pine trees as ornamentals and to grow in gardens. So our firs, our spruces, and our pines, and they actually import a pine that they grow in a plantation for timber, one of our pines from the Northern Hemisphere. So they do that there. But yeah, I'm totally going to check out the Christmas tree situation in Australia.
I was there in December,
Mm-hmm.
and what I remember, the department store is artificial Christmas trees and lots of spray snow everywhere.
Right.
People in short shorts and tank tops wandering around.
I know, it's just so, there's such a disconnect, huh?
They still have a turkey dinner with Christmas pudding.
Yeah, they do the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or they have barbecues on the beach. It's like totally strange, totally weird. And because, obviously it's in the Southern Hemisphere, so our seasons are reversed. So when we have winter, they have summer. So they have the summer Christmas, and we have the winter Christmas. It's pretty cool.
Carol was asking, which was the plant that spread from the base, looked a bit like a trembling aspen that spreads the same way?
From the base. Okay, I wonder.
I think that might have been the Araucariaceae, the one, the 12,000-year-old,
Yeah, the Antarctic beach. Yeah. Um, and you mentioned it looks a bit like it reminded you of an aspen.
the clonal aspect.
Exactly. I was going to say, yeah, because the aspens do that. And there is, yes, there are. And what do they call that clonal group of aspens? Prado or something. It exists, I think, in Utah. And yeah, it's huge. And the underground root system is about 18,000 years old. And the trees are 100 years old or 50 years old, the clonal suckers that grow. So it's not only a characteristic of the Antarctic beach. Aspens do it as well. So I've got a note here, and maybe it's the same one you're talking about, the Huon pine. Does that sound familiar? In Tasmania. So yes, a clonal mass, the individuals live 4,000 years, which is absolutely incredible. And they think that the root mass is 10,000 years old. So those are unbelievable, unbelievable times for us to consider. And the trembling aspen in Utah, that's called Pando, that clonal colony. It has 47,000 stems, and each stem is 130 years old, apparently. And while the root system, as I said, was thought to be 16,000 years old. So very successful reproductive strategy, that cloning, that suckering. And the Wallamai pine, too, which was recently rediscovered, also has clonal trunks and clonal suckers. And they're all genetically identical.
Just looked up that plant in Tasmania. I was thinking of it's called the King's Holly.
Oh, yeah?
Lomatia tasmanica. It's 43,000 years old.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. The root mass is 43,000 years old.
Sterile. Like it's I think there's only one of these plants, and they reckon it's a hybrid that just never died.
Exactly. And it just kept throwing up those suckers to those trunks to photosynthesize and to feed the root system. So you said that it was sterile, so it doesn't produce flowers. Yeah.
It does flowers.
They don't produce seeds. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to think about, isn't it?
Peter's asking, Sheila, what will you be up to botanically on your next trip?
Gee whiz. More of the same, actually. So this will be trip number 6, getting to know those national parks really well in that area. Going a little bit further afield, perhaps into New South Wales, into the national parks there, and seeing what's up. And each time I go, I just learn more and more and see more and more. That's spectacular, and I'm super lucky to be able to do that. So if any of you, especially those of us, and which would be all of us who love plants and love botany, go to Australia, go to Queensland for the biodiversity and for the fascinating species that exist there. Also for the wildlife, because there are the same effect, the same effect of endemism happened with the fauna of Australia. So of course, animals like kangaroos, wombats, koalas, all the marsupials that were able to evolve in Australia, they became dominant. Whereas here in the rest of the world, the placental mammals became dominant. And apparently one of the reasons why the marsupials were able to thrive is that for the longest time, there weren't dogs or cats in Australia. So small marsupials were not preyed upon. And the dingo is the canine that is now living in Australia, now grows, or now lives in the wild in Australia, but it's an introduced species. And it's had some effects on the ecosystem there. So all in all, just, I'm just super passionate about it, as you can tell, and I can't say enough about the continent and the experience.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
Well, you're
And,
very welcome.
this is only
Thank
part
you.
one. There's more to come. I'm really looking forward to that. So in case anybody wasn't paying attention, the rest of this presentation will continue a week today, next Monday, same time, same place, except it'll be Zoom only. We won't be at the museum. We'll just be doing it on Zoom. But there's much more to follow and equally fascinating.
Thank you all for listening.
Yeah,